Good afternoon. Anyone on the webinar would like to check their audio, please raise your hand.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are here in Midtown. Manhattan always reminds me the city that never sleeps moniker is not optional. So there's no uncheck the I don't want to not sleep box, you know. So get ready for a long week, I'll say. But actually, I think, for what we have on the agenda, looking forward to getting through everything this week. For those of you sitting around the table, you'll see some gear representing what is coming up on our 50th anniversary for the councils. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on during the week. The CCC's meeting is coming up in next month, and it's going to be a big agenda item. We appreciate all the work that Mary's been doing for this big anniversary for us, and I'll like I said, I'll get into that a little bit later. Our first agenda item is on the omnibus for the essential fish habitat, and I have Jessica Toria across from me as well as Chris Haig. So I'm going to let them get into the EFH stuff that has been going on for a while. I can't think of anything that we've done that has been quite so thorough, and I just going to lead in with I'm just so thankful for all the work that's been done so far, and I will turn it over to Jessica and Tori to get us started there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that introduction. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Omnibus Essential Fish Habitat Amendment. We're going to review the public input that we received from the public comment period that was held from December into early February. Then we're going to review the Fishery Management Action Team recommendations, staff recommendations, and the EOP committee and AP recommendations that have been developed. And then you'll have the opportunity to consider whether you'd like to take final action on the amendment. So the purpose of the amendment was to consider revisions to the essential fish habitat designations for all the council's managed species. The proposed updates within the amendment cover 14 council managed species, excluding monkfish. New England Fishery Management Council had the lead on updating the monkfish designations, and those are pending submission to NIMS at this time. So essential fish habitat are those waters and substrates necessary to fish for spawning, breeding, feeding, and growth to maturity. Habitat areas of particular concern. These are a subset of essential fish habitat that's ecologically important, sensitive to human-induced degradation, stressed by development, or rare. The council is required to designate essential fish habitat for its managed species, and it really matters because these designations are used in the essential fish habitat consultation process to protect habitat from adverse effects. So the consultation process, federal agencies must consult with NOAA Fisheries on any actions that might adversely affect EFH. They consult on about 300 projects every year within the Northeast region, and about 80% of these consultations occur in nearshore and state waters. And in terms of a real sort of practical way that this action applies, the designation maps, so the essential fish habitat or habitat areas of particular concern maps that are created go into the essential fish habitat mapper that NOAA Fisheries hosts. So project developers, groups like BOEM or Army Corps may go onto these sites, they drop a pin on the map, and the mapper pulls up a list of all of the species and life stages that have essential fish habitat designated in that specific location. And it also includes a link to the text descriptions that have been developed for each of these managed resources. So those maps and text really are an entry point to the consultation process. And that's the very beginning of that beginning step. So they determine what needs to be in their EFH assessment, and then they start those discussions with NOAA Fisheries for their individual projects. So just to take a little trip down memory lane, the council completed its essential fish habitat review in April 2025, but our work on essential fish habitat actually goes back far further than that. In 2017, the council hosted an essential fish habitat improvements workshop and identified a number of steps that we could take to improve our EFH designations. Around that time, Tori Kentner started working with us on EFH, and Chris Hake came on board as a modeler to work with us on essential fish habitat. So this work really dates back to 2017. From 2023 to 2025, we worked on the essential fish habitat review, and that reviewed all the 9 required EFH components for the fishery management plans, and really set the foundation for the information that's contained within the amendment. You approved the public hearing document in October 2025, and we took the document out for hearings over the winter. That comment period closed on February 11th, and since then we've had a number of FMAT, EOP, committee, and AP meetings, and so I'll be reviewing all those recommendations with you. So that brings us to our meeting today. So within the amendment document, as I noted, we've got texts and maps. Where possible, they're broken out by life stage. The councils are required to establish these texts and maps in the FMPs. And I'll note that this action, there are no implementing regulations or environmental impacts that are associated with this amendment action. So it is actually a document that's categorically excluded from the National Environmental Policy Act. So it looks a little bit different in terms of some of the analysis in the document. It's a little simpler because it is excluded from NEPA. But within the document sections, you have all of those texts and maps laid out within there. Because we have 14 species by life stage, I'm not going to review all of those with you today because I know we've gone through all of that information during previous meetings. So within the public hearing document, when we went out for public hearings, there were 2 alternatives contained within the action. There was the alternative 1, which was the no action alternative. So no changes would be made to the current designations. So they wouldn't use that more recent up-to-date information that was developed during the essential fish habitat review. And alternative 2 was the action alternative to make updates to both EFH and HAPC, those suites of information that were contained within the document. So with that public hearing document and those 2 alternatives, we went out for public comment. The comment period, again, December 1 to February 11th, we received 25 comments, 25 written comments. There were 5 hearings that were held, 4 virtual, and 1 was held in person in Arlington, Virginia at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission meeting. Thanks to Mike Luisi, he popped in there and served as our hearing officer at that meeting. The attendance at our hearings, we had a pretty good turnout. We had 58 in attendance cumulatively across the hearings. But when you excluded the presenters, the hearing officers, and folks that attended more than 1 hearing, we ended up with 36 unique individuals that attended those hearings. So there were a number of public comment themes that came out during the course of the meeting. Within your briefing materials, the full package of written comments and hearing summaries is included. So I'm just going to run through some of the high-level summary themes that were noted at those meetings. So we had some commenters that noted significant concerns regarding microplastics, man-made chemicals, nutrient runoff, and other issues that might affect species life cycles. And there were also some comments that were received on long-term damage to specific habitat types like bivalve beds and coral communities due to decades of fishing and non-fishing activities. There was some support for alternative 2, which is the action alternative, exactly as is. So moving all the EFH and HAPCs forward. There was also some support for alternative 2, but minus some or all of the habitat area of particular concerns that were included within the document. So there were a number of folks that were supportive, fully supportive of the EFH component, but wanted to see some or all of those HAPCs to be modified or removed from the document. There was a comment that the habitat areas of particular concern should have been shared with the individual species committees or advisors in advance. There were also comments about not having maps for habitat areas of particular concern and some of the challenges of visualizing these more dynamic features. So, and as I noted, I think in some of the previous meetings, for habitat areas of particular concern, especially dynamic features, the Essential Fish Habitat Consultation staff we're cautious about having very specific static maps because the maps have to be established in the FMP. So it's a flat map in a document that stays as it is until it gets modified by the council. And some of these more dynamic features like SAV, those are things that might be changing annually. So they were concerned about missing some of those consult opportunities. We also had comments that the habitat areas of particular concern would become gear restricted areas and that they were intended to ban mobile bottom tending gear. There were written comments that longfin squid was being used as a direct target for restrictive measures within this action, and that the limited data on blue line tilefish could actually be used to close Hudson Canyon. We also heard comments that surf clam and ocean quahog designations, those habitat area of particular concern designations focused on climate vulnerability instead of fishery productivity. We did also receive comments that requests for better, we received a request for better narrative explanations of some of the life histories and modeling diagnostics that were used to justify the essential fish habitat areas. So this is actually a comment that came in from BOEM, the mineral mining group, wanted to better understand some of the more technical information that underpinned the designations that were being developed, the work that Tori and Chris had done as part of this project. The demersal species, for those species, we received some comments about some of their preferences for high complexity habitats. So for black sea bass in particular, live bottom and rock and clay features were noted. And for that live bottom, examples of those could include things like sea whip or star coral or types of live bottom that these species have habitat affinity for. There was a comment about maintaining and expanded the current tilefish habitat areas of particular concern designations to other canyons using more information. So right now that designation includes 4 canyon areas. But there is additional submersible data and other information that's been gathered over the last few years throughout our region. And it was noted that the 2 subspecies of clams, that they should be noted as subspecies and not as separate species to avoid any unintended fishery management consequences. So on February 27th, the Fishery Management Action Team met, and this is after the comment period closed. We'd summarized all the public comments and really reviewed and integrated a number of these public comments. So the FMAT integrated some of the comments related to those black sea bass habitat types. So like on the right-hand side, there's a paragraph that really highlighted in detail in the document all of the different types of natural and man-made structures that black sea bass uses as habitat in the FH designation. So those changes were made. The FMAT also addressed the Northeast Fisheries Science Center staff edits that had been provided. And just want to note to John Hare that we really appreciated the stock assessment staff taking a really close look at all of the text and maps. We'd intended to send all of these drafts up to them before going out for public hearings, but we had the government shut down. which derailed that at the time. So we sent this information up to them concurrently with the public comment period. So we're able to take all that information in. Most of their comments were relatively minor, so we were able to accept all of their changes and make modifications based on that. The FMAT also reviewed habitat area of particular concern criteria tables that were developed, and we also recommended that new habitat area of particular concern spatial maps be developed for some of the habitat types. So for the species habitat types in those nearshore areas, we talked to the EFH consultation staff to see what we could potentially do that would sort of thread the balance between having more detailed maps that would help people see the spatial areas that we're talking about, but without having them be so fine scale that it would set up the potential to miss some consultation opportunities where those might occur. So based on that, we were able to develop new maps that cut the EFH off at 10 meters or less for those nearshore habitat areas, because we wouldn't have expected any of those habitat types to be deeper than a 10-meter depth. So we were able to develop those. We updated the other applicable laws within the amendment, that those need to be completed for submission. And we also discussed restructuring the document into two distinct alternative suites, one for essential fish habitat and one for habitat areas of particular concern. So instead of just having the two alternatives we went out to public hearings with, we now have four broken into two suites. And lastly, the group revisited their discussion about oyster aquaculture cages that had been included in the list of man-made structures for scup and sea bass. However, the consultation staff had concerns about the temporary nature of that gear, even though there is research showing that scup and sea bass are feeding, spawning, doing all kinds of things with these oyster aquaculture cages as habitat. Due to that temporary nature, that was removed from those designations. Okay, so just to highlight those two suites of alternatives for you, you now have an EFH alternative 1, no action and action, and an HAPC alternative 1, action and no action alternative. Because we split those out into two separate sections, the document had to be slightly restructured. So the proposed changes to EFH are all now contained within section 6. So all of those text and maps are bundled together. The proposed changes to HAPCs are now in section 7 bundled together. And then the rest of the document, the supplemental information, the council's fishing effects determinations, all of those other pieces remained the same as what was contained within the public hearing document. Another addition to the current amendment was the inclusion of publication maps. Previously, we had included screenshots from the Essential Fish Habitat demo application for our maps within the document. Tori went back through with all the outputs that Chris produced, and we now have really nice, clean production maps that can be handed off with all the spatial files that can be handed off to NOAA Fisheries for the EFH mapper. So generally, the current EFH is in green. The proposed EFH in the amendment appears in blue. So following that Fishery Management Action Team meeting, the staff developed recommendations for the Ecosystem and Ocean Planning Committee and Council to consider. And the staff recommended that the council adopt Essential Fish Habitat Alternative 2. So this is updating the descriptions and designations of EFH for all 14 of our managed species. And the reason for that was because these text and mapping approaches vastly improved the designations. They're more up to date. It uses enhanced habitat information. In fact, it's a really big leap forward in terms of essential fish habitat work in our region. We're the second council to begin integrating model-based outputs into our essential fish habitat maps. The North Pacific Council was the first to do that. And through our CCC Habitat Work Group, the cross-council work group, I know a number of other councils are considering how they can incorporate model-based approaches. So we're at the forefront of beginning to develop these type of approaches nationally. The public comments were generally supportive of the EFH text and maps and the essential fish habitat alternatives. Most of the comments related to that included some suggestions for improvements that were generally integrated. So the staff recommendations, habitat area of particular concern alternative 2. This is the action alternative. Staff recommends we update the descriptions and designation of HAPCs for the FMPs, but we do that with the following modifications that are described in Table 1 for the staff memo. So before I jump into what's in the staff memo, I just want to take a step back and just reiterate what HAPCs are. They're that subset of EFH, and councils and NOAA fisheries use them in a variety of ways to support habitat conservation. They don't mandate any specific protections, but they can help prioritize conservation efforts, and they are used in terms of creating enhanced scrutiny for recommendations to protect fish habitats. So a really great example, I recently had a letter come across my desk for the Aurora fiber optic cable that's being run across the Atlantic. And NOAA, the EFH consultation staff, sent a letter to their project developers because they had those fiber optic cables running straight through habitat areas of particular concern that were in the New England region. So their conservation recommendations back to the project developers were, please reroute your cables outside of those habitat areas of particular concern. So that's a great example of where these can really be used to help emphasize modifications to some of these projects to protect fish habitats. These designations, they've been applied in a variety of different ways by the different councils. They don't necessarily identify the most important habitat, and it doesn't have to be the most important habitat to a specific fishery. It can be place-based, it can be a specific habitat type, it could be a habitat type based on a species. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of how councils have applied these. The Mid-Atlantic Council has 2 HAPCs that are currently in place. So this is what would be represented with the no action alternative. For juvenile and adult golden tilefish, clay and pueblo outcroppings in 4 canyons between 100 and 300 meters were designated as habitat areas of particular concern. This specific designation actually has a map that went along with it, and it included those 4 canyon areas at those specific depths. For summer flounder, juvenile and adults, the council had previously designated submerged aquatic vegetation as a habitat area of particular concern. That designation has been in place, I think, since 2001, and it has not had a map associated with it for some of the same reasons that we've already discussed. So the staff recommendations, the first column essentially lays out all of the species for which we were considering modifications or retention of a habitat area of particular concern. If that species is not listed in this list, then there was no proposed HAPC associated with that species. So the staff recommendations for longfin squid, HAPC was put forward using quantitative data. So the top 25% quantile of occupied habitat from model-based outputs. So this is sort of a concentrated hotspot where those squid occur. The staff recommend that this be removed from the alternative, so not included. But the Fishery Management Action Team and staff both noted that the FMAT should explore these for the council prior to the next review. This is our first foray into model-based outputs, and we have all of these new quantitative tools available for most of these species, and we could explore a quantile-based approach. I think the FMAT we could look at a cumulative approach with this quantitative information that looks at, the highest 5% concentrated area. There's a variety of things that could be considered if the council should want to explore that. So we think that's something that's not quite ready for this go round, but would be worth putting a little bit of effort and consideration into for the council's next cycle. For bluefish, summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and Atlantic surf clam, habitat areas of particular concern were proposed based on information from the climate vulnerability crosswalks that had been developed by the University of Massachusetts. And that project crosswalked information from the NOAA Fish and Shellfish Climate Vulnerability Assessment and the NOAA Fish Habitat Climate Vulnerability Assessment, as well as information from the Atlantic Coast Fish Habitat Partnership Habitat Dependency Project. So essentially, yes, I see some folks shaking their heads as I'm laying these out. 3 different projects all provided important, useful information about habitat, how dependent a species is on a specific habitat, and then how vulnerable that habitat is to climate change. So those 6 habitat type-based habitat areas of particular concern were essentially taken directly from that project, looking at fish habitat types where you had moderate to high dependence, and then you had high or very high vulnerability to climate change. So not a surprise to see SAV, salt marsh, oyster reefs, some of these nearshore marine intertidal habitats all show up high on that vulnerability component. So staff recommend keeping those in the habitat area of particular, keeping those in alternative 2, but also including a new habitat area of particular concern map that's been developed and associated with those. And I'll show you those just in a minute in the next couple slides. In the case of Atlantic surf clam, that habitat area of particular concern discussion talked about the climate crosswalk information, but there was also information in there about ocean acidification. So what we actually is keep the crosswalk piece as an HAPC, so it's consistent with all those other species, but taking that second paragraph that talks about ocean acidification and just moving it into the EFH text. And we also recommend doing the same thing for ocean quahog, moving the information about the cold pool and ocean acidification just into that EFH text. So the Fishery Management Action Team and the staff felt that these are important components of habitat, and those are important things to retain, but they don't necessarily need to be called out as a habitat area of particular concern. So we can retain it within that EFH text, so it's still there. Cold pool is an important feature for ocean quahog. There's a lot of new research talking about sort of that thermal tolerance and the importance of that as habitat for them. So that piece would still be retained. Moving down to golden tilefish, you have your current habitat area of particular concern that's been developed. We just recommend just a few minor editorial tweaks to that HAPC just to make it consistent with the other text in the document, since we're cleaning up all of the text, and also not doing conversions for Celsius, Fahrenheit, feet, meters for everything. We're just going with Celsius and just going with meters in the document. So very minor tweaks. So keep that HAPC as it is. However, there was a recommendation that there is all of this new information about those tilefish canyon areas that has come out. So it's recommended the FMAT should explore these other canyons and other information prior to the next council review. So it's not quite ready. We haven't gone through that information yet, but we'll have another review, which I don't know, in a year or 2, we'll probably start working on that again, getting ready for the next review so we could take that up at that point. Lastly, blue line tilefish, this was a habitat area of particular concern. Really, this was put in the document to try to help gather information. That northern side of Hudson Canyon, it's come up anecdotally a number of times to us and to the stock assessment experts that that is an area of higher catch rates. But it's one of our data poor species. We really don't have a lot of information on it. So we put it in the document to see if we got any information from the public or researchers or fishermen, if anyone had any information about any of about that area or any of those features that might be important for Blue Line. We really didn't get any information through the public comment process on that, except fishermen expressing concerns that this area could potentially be closed based on its inclusion in the document. So there really isn't, we were really looking for some information there, really didn't get it. There's no reason to retain it. So the staff is recommending that be removed from the document. Okay, so that is the staff recommendation and the basis for it. As I noted, we have new habitat area of particular concern maps that were developed. So on the left, black sea bass HAPC. So essentially taking the EFH for the life stages that's included in that HAPC and just clipping it less than 10 meters. Basically what you have. So you have a map that indicates that these are inshore habitats that we will be talking about with that HAPC. So it doesn't include the whole EEZ. So it makes it a bit more clear, but broad enough that I think the EFH consultation staff feel that they have some flexibility there in their consultation process. On the right-hand side, you have a map for bluefish, a map on the left for summer flounder, a map on the right for scup, and a map on the left for Atlantic surf clam. And then on the right-hand side is your current golden tilefish habitat area of particular concern. So I'll also note within those maps for some species, that's the HAPC, it may contain more than one inshore habitat type within that area. So summer flounder, for example, includes both SAV and salt marsh. Come on, clicker. There we go. Okay, so the Ecosystem and Ocean Planning Committee met jointly with the advisors on March 10th, and the committee developed recommendations for the council through 2 motions. The first, they moved to recommend the council select EFH Alternative 2, which was the action alternative that passed by consent. The second was to select HAPC Alternative 2 with the modifications described in the staff memo that also passed by consent. And I'll just note during that advisory panel, some members of the AP did note that they had support for this motion. And you've got a detailed, more detailed meeting summary within your meeting packet in terms of what the discussion during the committee and the advisory panel meeting. All right. Oh, there we go. So with that, we can take any questions for me, for Tori Kentner, or for Chris Haig.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I want to say that despite this being a requirement, this was so far from a rubber stamp into how, how in depth that you guys got to the importance of this, to what comes next, to hopefully, I think as we get into this comment period, I'm very excited, that I think we are in a very good place. And I really want to say how much I appreciate everything that went into this so far. So let's start. I'll look around the table for questions to, as Jessica said, to Jessica or Tori or Chris. Any questions on what has been presented so far around the table? And then I will give the public a chance as well. Go ahead, Rich.
Thank you, Jessica. I was just curious, as states generate new data about habitat, how do you recommend that they get this information to you? I know it's too late for this, obviously, this version here, but what's the mechanism that you recommend? Thank you.
Hi, Tori here. So the mechanism we do now is I basically go to the states and request data as we need it, but there might be a better way to do that in the future if you have suggestions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Jessica, Sorry, I appreciate that, Tori. And Rich, I think that's a really great question. Maybe something to think about. I do see Michelle's hand up as well, but I think too, just kind of queuing up to the states. You know, I'm thinking particularly of our relationship with ASMFC and how often we get hit up on reminders for sending stuff in. That something along those lines could be helpful for sure. But Michelle, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just echo all of the praises that have already come before with respect to, staff and FMAT and everybody who, dedicated so much time into developing these more quantitative tools we have to better support the EFH process. But I think like this year, in regards to information from the states, there was a questionnaire, right? That is one of the appendices that we reviewed as the committee and the joint AP. And so I feel like we discussed, taking another look at that questionnaire. Maybe that's something we could send out on an annual basis, just to sort of store those habitat updates that the states might be contributing to, or at least, we have some repository of, oh, okay, here's where we need to go to, update this information, particularly for the non-model piece that Tori worked on. Thanks.
Follow up. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yes. So on all of the fishing activities that the states were doing, we did send out a very specific questionnaire. But I will note one of the things that maybe some of our state fisheries directors here have ideas on maybe how to do this better. When we first developed NERA, the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment, which is essentially the portal that's housing all of the state fishery independent data, we did do a lot of outreach through our Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership, through some of which is the habitat group under ASMFC, out of their shop, dealing with some of the state folks in terms of pushing out that shiny application so they could see the data that we're housing. We worked with some of our NOAA partners there as well to help us identify any surveys or other information that might have been useful to include. So maybe as we do our data updates this cycle, it might be worth another push out of that application and sharing that with our state partners to kind of dig into that. Because one, we want people using those portals because the data is accessible. And we're thinking of building in when EFH is done, this project is done, hosting our New England and Mid-Atlantic EFH information there, including a lot of the model outputs and products that are associated with that for states or for consultation staff to be able to access there. So maybe it's worth another sort of push out of all of that so people know what we have and can help us identify what might be missing or what might be useful to include. Make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'm very supportive. I don't know if we have other hands around the table as far as questions or just the one question that Rich has already brought up. I think, unfortunately that, that kind of nagging and reminders is just part of life. It's something that we're very used to, but at the same time, without it, I'm not sure where we would end up. So certainly appreciate the reminders to folks that the importance of this, and as new data becomes available, that we make sure to incorporate. Not seeing any other hands around the. Oh, okay, we do have a few. So I'm going to go to Sunny and then to John Hare.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering a question about the cables. Are all them projects scrutinized? The transatlantic cables that they put out?
I think most of them are, especially if they're coming through the EEZ and they have landfall because they're going to require permits or other federal agencies involved. So I'd say yes. And on that cable in particular, I think that is included in the update that Karen Green is going to be providing after, for the next agenda topic. So if she can provide an update on that project and know, if all of them are essentially scrutinized, but I think they are.
Thank you.
You good, Sonny? Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I agree. I think that, the states have all, are responding as necessary. And if Karen gets to that, I would appreciate that. And then we'll go to John Hare.
A comment, Mr. Chair? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I just want to congratulate and thank Jessica and Tori and Chris and the whole FMAT for doing this 5-year review, but producing such a robust science product to support management. And kind of going to this question, it can be updated. So there's a clearly defined path to add new information, update the EFH information available to the council, and then pass that back to the council. I think this is the first time that we've had something like this in this region. And certainly, we may be a little bit behind the North Pacific Council, but I would argue that this is much more robust than what they have as well. So I think the council should also be very proud of what has been developed here. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you, John. I really appreciate that. I completely agree. And I think that, going back to Rich's point, the only way that we do this is that all of the partners are fully involved. The public comment and concerns about the maps and our notion that how important it is to have that be more than something static in consultations is so important. The notion that it's always being updated is what's going to make this so important. So, Rich, did you have another question or follow-up?
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just thinking about Tori's question, how I would recommend getting and implementing new data. But I just thought, the web page is great, and if we could leverage that, the partners will be using the web page, and they're the ones that will be generating new information. If you have an opportunity for users to provide a comment somewhere in there, I think that over time you might see patterns here. Or there's coral grounds in Delaware Bay or something like that are really important fish habitat. Things like that. I think you might get those kind of solicitations there. Thank you.
Tori, follow-up?
Thanks for that. That's a really good suggestion. And I think that brings up the point that I don't always know what I don't know. So there may be data sets that I'm not familiar with from each state that I could add to the Data Explorer.
Thanks. Jim Gilmore?
Yeah, just a quick note to add my voice to the choir. I think Jess and Tori did a great job, including there was some little agita during the process during this, and I think you handled it very well. I'm really enjoying the new graphics too. I think they're a nice improvement. One thing as an improvement, if you could go back to the last slide, if you still have it on there, I think you need a new picture because I think it's Pete Himchuk, Mike Louisi had dark hair. Frank Blount was at the meeting, so I think maybe we should give you a new picture. Wayne Elliott.
It's an oldie but goodie.
But anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. That's great. Any other hands around the table, Bobby? Go ahead.
Thank you, Jessica. It was a lot of legwork went into this. I do have one question, and it's probably a kind of a dumb question because I have a lot of those. What actually is the consultation process? I mean, I understand that an EFH designation, I understand the concept and the point of it, that if a project's going to happen that's going to have interaction with an area of designation, then it triggers a consult. But who are you consulting with? I mean, is it through the developer and the agency? Is it through the developer, the agency, and council staff? Is it? That's where I'm kind of a little hazy on who's actually being who's informing who in this?
So for our council and our region, most of the consultations are directly between the NOAA fisheries, habitat consultation staff, and then they're working with the project developers or those federal permitting agencies. Because if it's another federal agency is implementing a project that could affect fish habitat, that's what triggers the consultation. So most of those are happening directly between NOAA fisheries and those groups. And the consultations, like I said, they could take a variety of forms, but their staff build those relationships working with those entities. So they do early consultations where someone may be developing a project early. So they may reach out to the staff to talk about what they're thinking of doing and how they might structure their project. And then there's the formal consultation that gets sort of triggered, with that EFH sort of overlap on their project. And they go through a more formal process, and NOAA Fisheries sends consultation letters with EFH recommendations to those entities, and they might ask for modifications to projects. So it could be like a project proposes to do dredging of a port. And then NOAA Fisheries might come back and say, well, that's fine, but we would prefer if you dredge during this window because it's when SAV isn't growing or a specific species isn't present at that time. So there's a back and forth that goes on between them. The councils can also weigh in on the consultation process, and we have the ability to do that. But as you know, I'm half-time habitat. The other half of me is clams. And with 300 consultations coming into the region, we don't really have the time or the staff capacity to engage on all of those things. But we do track all of those. So all of the consultation recommendations and all of the work that NOAA is doing, we see all those letters when they go in and out. I get those in my inbox. I glance at those. So we see what they're asking for in terms of conservation recommendations and track what's happening there, but we tend to weigh in a little bit less. And the council, as you know, sends letters on projects like you send letters on wind, you've sent letters on Navy, sonar testing, other things we tend to weigh in and may emphasize some of the same points that the EFH consultation staff are making, but we typically don't get directly engaged in that formal consult. So hopefully I didn't butcher my description of this. I'm sure the Habitat staff are listening in. So if I missed anything, they can either jump in now or they're going to present for the next presentation. They can clarify that.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And I'll look online to see if any hands come up, but it's not remotely a silly question. I think it's a really important question. And outside of the councils at the, as you're getting into the state level, I think, I would look to any state directors to say where they are. I will say for New Jersey, I just absolutely appreciate our, work, my time in New Jersey with NOAA staff on just staying in lockstep on what EFH means to the projects that we're reviewing. And, I certainly hope that's true for every state. I imagine they have, similar situations. But as I said, I would look to other state directors to see how that review has gone and how we as states have handled the council and federal part of all of this. So, thanks. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so I would like to reach out to the public, both here and online, to see if we have any questions for staff on this. Not seeing any in the room, but I do see Julie Evans' hand online. So, Julie, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Julie Evans. I represent the East Hampton Town Fisheries Advisory Committee. And I have a question about fish habitat because, it's very complicated if, we have areas where there are contaminated sediments. We have areas that are used for dumping mass quantities during dredge projects. Have any of these issues been considered, especially when the Army Corps of Engineers are involved? That's my question.
Yes, so I think there's a variety of things that are considered during the consultations. I think the broad focus of the EFH consultation staff is on conservation of fish habitat. So it definitely has a strong fish habitat focus there. But if projects were to propose, dumping a bunch of contaminants that might cause damage to that habitat, I think through their consultations, they would have comments related to those. But again, I don't do that many consults directly. So if the consultation staff online have anything to add or Mike's staff, they'd probably be better able to follow up on that.
Well, thank you for trying to handle that, Jessica. And I have to apologize. I had some technical difficulties here. So if we have a hand online from Noah, I'm not going to be able to see it for a few seconds. So apologies to everyone for that. But all right, that's why we have a. Okay, great, thank you. So I'll look to Karen or Joe. Go ahead. Thank you.
Do you want me to? It's Karen Green from NOAA Fisheries. Do you want me to?
Yeah, that would be
take
great.
that
Thank you,
on
Karen.
now,
Appreciate
or I can talk about it in the presentation. Whatever your choice.
I prefer you answer the question now.
Sure.
That's okay.
Okay. So Jessica had it, pretty accurately when we do consultations. So federal agencies are required to consult with us on any action they fund, authorize, or undertake that may adversely affect EFH. And the bar for that is really low. An adverse effect is anything that reduces the quality or quantity of EFH. So basically, they're consulting with us on everything. And when we do our consultation, we are looking at what are the effects of that action on the habitats and the sensitive life stages of the species, the federally managed species, as well as species that aren't federally managed, because we also think about things like striped bass or river herring or oysters, things
Or
that
lobster, or lobster.
Yes, or lobster. So those are all part of the equation when we do our consultation. And then we would provide the action agency with recommendations on avoiding, minimizing, or offsetting the impacts that are resulting from those actions.
And can I ask you, how many times have you been successful in stopping an action that you felt was bad for essential fish habitat? Has there ever been a case where a federal agency has gotten a no from you?
We have recommended that actions not occur. It isn't often that we aren't able to recommend changes that avoid and minimize. So we don't often stop things, but we do have a lot of success in minimizing adverse effects and getting an offset. And it really depends on what the project is, what the project purpose is. We're just providing advice so that the action agency can make that informed decision as part of their public interest review.
Well, I'm more concerned with the Army Corps of Engineers and their wholesale of dumping on traditional dump sites in Long Island Sound and what that has done to the lobster industry in Long Island Sound over the past 20, 30 years. I mean, there is no lobster industry there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I appreciate you answering the question, and
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I appreciate the question. And we do have some follow-up. And I just want to say from the state's perspective that, this review is extremely important. And I think, especially with time of year restrictions and stuff like that, and as Karen mentioned, it goes beyond the species that we manage, that we have imposed some very important restrictions over time. And I know I have a few hands around the table. I saw Mike Pentney and John Hare's hands both go up, so I'm going to go to Mike and then John.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Karen Green hit on this, but I just wanted to make sure everybody is clear that unlike, for example, the consultation process under the Endangered Species Act, under the Magnuson Act for Essential Fish Habitat, what NIMS provides action agencies are non-binding recommendations. So they are just recommendations. Karen said advice, and action agencies are not required to follow and implement all of our recommendations. If they don't intend to follow our recommendations, they are supposed to write us, to document that in writing to us and explain why. But it's a key, it's a very important thing to remember that those recommendations that we provide to action agencies are non-binding.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we had, Joe, if you had your hand up online, if you want to go ahead, thank you. And John, you're off the hook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jessica, for the presentation. I'm Joe Myers. I'm with Sea-Watch International. And I had a question about the bridging document that you had referenced. It seemed like it was the reference document for a lot of the HAPC information. Did that document include any geographic caveats with respect to the intertidal sand inclusion and importance that you have included here for surf clams?
Thanks for the question, Joe. I'll look to. There's a consultation going on here, Joe. Let's see.
I'll just add that the rationale there is that, given what we know recently about surf clam growth and what we know about surf clams moving offshore, further offshore, particularly in the mid-Atlantic, it's just hard for me to wrap my head around intertidal sand in those regions of the fishery being particular concern and important for surf clams.
So the intertidal sand that was identified within that climate crosswalk project, and that was identified as part of the ACFIP and NOAA fish habitat climate vulnerability assessment. So you can either find that information in Appendix C of the amendment, which has the full crosswalk table included within there, or there are individual crosswalk narratives, that one for every single species, that actually appears on the NERA website. I didn't include all of those crosswalk documents. There wasn't a specific depth that was given for that intertidal component, but the maps that were created in here, as I noted, just generically for all of the inshore habitat types were bounded at 10 meters or less, to be clear that these are those habitat types, but habitat types that occur in shallow areas. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, that gives me at least a good reference point that I can go and dig a little further into it. For the next go around, it might be applicable to include some of the recent surf clam growth and temperature influences on growth that we've since been a part of in Science Center of Marine Fisheries.
Great, thanks, Joe, and I appreciate that. Appreciate the question, and appreciate all the the public input that you have provided in tracking this. So I don't see any other hands online for questions. So I think if that is accurate, I will speak slowly to give myself some time. Otherwise, I will look forward to a motion. We have a motion from the EOP committee, or motions plural, I believe. So I do see a hand up from the chair of that committee. So go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just wait till Jessica gets to the right slide. There we go. So the motions coming from the committee were, recommendations to the council. So just on behalf of the committee, I'll start with the first one. Move that the council select EFH Alternative 2 as its preferred alternative for submission to NOAA Fisheries. And as a committee motion, it does not require a second. And I think, again, just extending my thanks to the staff, the FMAT, to Chris Haig for being willing to be on every single one of the public hearings. We had a lot of questions about the model components. It was really valuable to have Chris there. And I also want to thank all of the members of the public and the fishing community who attended those public hearings. I think their input was extremely valuable and led to modifications that led to a better product. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think that, this process would have been nearly as robust without the committee's work on this, as well as staff, and Chris and others at FMAT as well deserves a lot of kudos for what has happened so far. So we have the motion before us that from the committee that does not need a second. It's also in front of all of us, I believe. So it's to move that the council select the EFH Alternative 2 as its preferred alternative for submission to NOAA Fisheries. So I will look around the table. Any discussion on this motion? Okay, I am not seeing anything around the table. I'm going to open this up to the public. Is there any comments or concerns from the public on this motion? Not seeing any. So with that, with no discussion on this, I'm going to ask hopefully the easy question. Is there any objection to moving this forward? I'm not seeing any objection. So we have that. And Madam Chair, I believe we have another motion out of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And the next motion on a committee is move that the council select HAPC Alternative 2 with the modifications described in the staff memo as its preferred alternative for submission to NOAA Fisheries.
Okay, thank you. I will look around the table to the council. Any comments or concerns on the motion out of committee? Not seeing any. I'll look to the public. Any comments on this? Not seeing any. Okay, so again, I will ask what is hopefully the easy question. Any objection to moving this forward? Not seeing any. Okay, so that will also pass by unanimous consent that the council is selecting HAPC Alternative 2 with the modifications described in the staff memo as its preferred alternative for submission to NOAA. Okay. Yep, go ahead, Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's already pretty much been said around the table, the thanks to everyone that put into this, the staff's hard work. I've had the privilege of being on this committee the last couple of years. I've served in the vice chair role in the last year or so. But staff, the public input, the phone calls from some of those in the back in the audience and all, I've appreciated all of it. But one thing I do want to note, or somebody I want to note, especially in this effort, has been our chair, Michelle Duvall. She has really helped lead this effort quite a bit along with staff. She's been as much a champion of this amendment process as anyone. I just want to make note of the chair. She's done an exceptional job helping us get this to the finish line along with the staff and everybody else that's contributed.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate that. In fact, I would like to lead us in a round of applause. Just in thank you to everybody for all the work that's done. Again, this is going so far beyond a rubber stamp for something that is a requirement. I just think you all really deserve that. So let's have a round of applause, please. Okay, so to staff, Jess and Tori, is there anything else that on this item that we need to tackle?
There's not. So we'll button it up, make the changes, and I hope to get it submitted in the next month,
Very good.
the fishery service.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so we will move on to the next agenda item. And as noted previously, that will be the habitat activities update. And Karen, I believe you had said that you were gonna take that for us.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I am.
Great, thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Oh, I do not. Do you have the slides, Jessica, or do you need me to pull them up? Oh, there they are. Great.
There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here again to provide you all with an update on the activities that the Habitat and Ecosystem Services Division are doing in the Mid-Atlantic the last 6 months or so. We were not able to participate in October, but I know that Jessica had our presentation and slides available for you. Some of our updates also include a few things from our South Atlantic, our CERO staff, especially for North Carolina. So most of the projects I'm going to talk about are things you've seen before, so I don't think this is going to be a very long update. And just, for your awareness, I know in the last update that we did, there was a slide on a website that we have called the Environmental Consultation Organizer. That is a publicly facing tracking system for our consultations. So if you all just Google, Environmental Consultation Organizer NOAA, you can come up on that page and you can see the consultations, both EFH and Endangered Species Act, that are ongoing nationally. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, bridges seem to be the primary infrastructure project that we're seeing in the Mid-Atlantic right now, including a lot of bridge replacements and some new bridge projects, as well as bridge protection, where they're putting fenders and other protection structures around the bridge piers. Some of the bigger projects, you've seen before, but one includes the Key Bridge down in Baltimore, where that replacement is ongoing. Pile driving began in January 2026, and it's going to take place throughout this year, including the construction of bridge piers and access trestles. A robust bubble curtain system is being implemented on all pile driving, and independent environmental monitors are looking for killed and stunned fish. Normally, we might recommend a time of year restriction for activities where we have runs of migratory fish, but for large scale projects like this, it's not possible to stop work for 3 or 4 months. So we recommend other technologies be used. And in the case of the Key Bridge, we have bubble curtains and other methods and monitoring to keep track. A planned explosive demolition on the remaining bridge piers has been pushed out to a later date, and the team should be more flexible in timing to avoid impacting fish. Again, doing this in the spring when we might have a run of river herring or American shad up there puts the species at risk. So if they can push it off, that's great. If not, we have those other methods. We're working closely with Federal Highways on minimization and mitigation as the plans are developed. So this is an iterative process where we're in communication with Federal Highways as the lead agency routinely throughout the bridge demolition and replacement. Other bridges that are in progress include the Maryland Transit Authority's replacement of the Bay Bridge. That's a Tier 2 NEPA process, and it seems that the new bridge will be built near the current alignment and we're a cooperating agency, and we've just initiated consultation with Federal Highways on that. And that's a project that you can find on the federal permitting dashboard. Again, if you Google federal permitting dashboard, that dashboard will come up, and it keeps track of the process and the consultations on that project. The Federal Rail Administration is also in the process of establishing a double track bridge along the entire northeastern corridor. And this includes 2 bridges in designated spawning habitat for migratory fish in Chesapeake Bay. It's the Susquehanna Rail Bridge and the Long Bridge in DC. And we are working with Federal Highways and the Federal Rail Administration on minimization for our species there, the migratory fish. More bridges. The Coast Guard is the lead federal action agency on the replacement and or rehabilitation of the fender systems on the Ben Franklin and Walt Whitman bridges in Philly. And we're doing early coordination with the applicant, who is the Delaware River Port Authority, to help advise on project design to avoid and minimize impacts to our trust resources. So this is an example of that early coordination that Jessica mentioned earlier, where sometimes we're involved in a project once they come in for permits, and sometimes we're involved early. And the earlier we're involved, the better, because we can make recommendations on that avoidance and minimization as part of the project design instead of after. A similar fender project is being permitted for the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And the Coast Guard has implemented a new policy with respect to that, which is considering these minor modifications to the existing bridge. And in this case, they're not pursuing resource agency coordination. And it's something that we're working closely with Maryland DNR on, because they may not be reaching out to us, but they'll reach out to the state because state permits are required. So this kind of ties into a point that was made earlier about NOAA Fisheries working with the states. We try to align our recommendations with the ones that the state fisheries folks make, but we also work with state permitting agencies in instances where there isn't a federal nexus or where the federal agency may not be coordinating with us. The last bridge we have is Federal Highways is overseeing the design of roadways in the vicinity of the Pennsylvania Turnpike when I-95 interchange, and that will include the replacement of that bridge over the Delaware. And that's another one where we have some early coordination going on with Federal Highways and other resource agencies to minimize the adverse effects. That's, you know, an area where not only do we have river herring and shad, we also have our protected resources folks involved because of short nose and Atlantic sturgeon. Next slide, please. Ports and navigation. We have a bunch of ports and port projects going on, and not a whole lot in the our mid-Atlantic, but there's a lot more going on in the South Atlantic right now. Surprisingly, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is still moving ahead with the permitting for the New Jersey Windport Phase 2. The applicant still is pursuing permitting. We've reviewed the revised EFH assessment and we've issued EFHCRs on that project. Our primary concern really was the additional new dredging that was pretty significant from Phase 1 and the placement of the dredge material in Delaware Bay as beneficial use. We're concerned about the nearshore placement and have recommended that they maximize wetland improvements as opposed to just placing it offshore and hoping it gets to the adjacent wetlands. Farther south in the Southeast region, the Habitat Conservation Division staff in CIRO are working on a couple of projects, including the Wilmington Harbor Navigation Improvement Project. Our agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are determining whether the MMPA, ESA, and EFH consultations will occur. They're not exactly sure when they're going to happen within that process. The Army Corps would like to complete them now as part of what they call a Section 403 study, but we believe that because the proposed action isn't clear, there are significant obstacles to completing the consultation at this time. For our consultations, we need to know, what is the project? When, where, how? And they don't exactly have that information, so we really can't issue CRs unless we know what they're doing. We also have the South Atlantic Regional Dredging National Environmental Policy Act document that the Corps is developing. It's an EIS that's going to examine using time of year restrictions for the dredging in the federal channels from Morehead City to Brunswick. There is a workshop planned later this month to talk about those things. The EIS alternative that we're offering balances fisheries value, fish presence, and the susceptibility of the fish to dredging impacts. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers expects to have the draft EIS, as it's shown on the slide, in 2007 and the final EIS in 2028. The last port project is one down in the Port Everglades, Florida. So not really within our region, but it's something of interest. And right now, the leadership has asked us to pause our consultations and the completing of the biological opinion so that they can further review the project. There's quite a lot of issues down there with corals, and I think they're trying to work to resolve those issues. Next slide. All right. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Coastal Storm Risk Management projects, and we've talked about these a number of times. And there's a bunch of them floating around out there, but there's really only two that are somewhat active right now. And one is the New York and New Jersey Harbor and Tributary Study. And that project originally had all kinds of storm gates and things being proposed. And it's really been narrowed down right now to things that are actionable. And the only actionable element that they're doing right now is a project in the New Jersey Meadowlands. And for that project, the U.S. Army Corps' Chiefs report was issued last week. So that's the one that they're moving ahead with, seeking funding for construction. Down in Virginia, we have the Norfolk Coastal Storm Risk Management Study, and we just completed consultation with them on Phase 1A, and it's mostly within the urbanized areas of the city of Norfolk, where they're going to do some small tide gates, some flood walls, and construction of some wetlands and shoreline protection along that phase. We do expect to see more phases of that in the future as the project moves ahead. There's a number of phases in this area. Next slide, please. Okay, beneficial use. We continue to see a push for beneficial use of dredge material, and there's a wide range of activities that can be considered beneficial use. One of the ones that has come in and we've recently provided comments on is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Philadelphia District and the dredging within the Philadelphia to the Sea Federal Navigation Channel and the placement of that sand material on the beaches in Delaware. So right now they're looking at 7 locations in Delaware to create berms and dunes. The other one is the historic area remediation site, and I know we've presented on that in the past. And that's the continued placement of material at the HARS, both for remediation, but also outside the areas that have been designated as remediation to improve fisheries habitat. We've just completed the consultation with the EPA on this one. And while we're all for, we have no objections to continuing to place the material out there, we're not quite ready to say that additional placement is enhancing fisheries habitat because we don't yet have enough information on the existing habitat versus whatever uplift we may get. So we're going to continue to work with EPA on developing, monitoring, and sampling plans to help show that information. Next slide. Wallops Island is another sort of beneficial use, but it's also a shoreline protection project. And NASA has requested consultation with us for their 50-year shoreline plan. The plan includes the construction of nearshore breakwaters, repairs to and/or extensions of the existing seawall, and some offshore sand mining at unknown Shoal A. The placement of the sand along 15,000 linear feet of oceanfront along the Wallops Island facility We're waiting for additional information from NASA on several of the project elements, including how much sand will be removed from the unnamed shoal for the initial beach nourishment, how many acres of the shoal will be dredged, how often the nourishment will occur, and how many cycles will happen over the 50-year lifespan of the project. We've also requested information on the existing habitats at that shoal, including the biological communities, and how NASA will survey and monitor the shoal to determine that the dredging doesn't substantially change its topography, and make sure that the conditions of the shoal are restored. They're saying that it will restore naturally as it accretes over time, and we're looking at, how are you going to monitor that? So right now we have not initiated consultation on that one because we're waiting for that information, and we're hoping to get that soon. Next. Offshore borrow areas in New Jersey. So the New York district of the Army Corps of Engineers is looking for more borrow areas for its program to do beach nourishment along the coast of New Jersey. They're running out of sand in the Seabright offshore borrow area. The district last consulted with us on the project in 2024, and we expressed concerns with new borrow areas avoiding important fishing grounds, sand ridges, and other valuable habitat. We've also provided the district with survey guidance for habitat characterization, which is consistent with the mapping guidance we had provided to BOEM for offshore activities. So it would be scaled to the impacts that we expect for this project, but it's consistent with those recommendations. Since we last provided an update, the district has conducted some benthic surveys to characterize the proposed borrow areas of interest, and we'll be meeting with them and BOEM later this month to discuss the results of the survey, as well as what other additional surveys may be needed, including biological surveys and ground truthing. Next. So as you can see, there's more in the borrow area arena, where we have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Baltimore reinitiated consultation with us on the continued use of Weaver Shoal as a sandbar area to support their Atlantic coast of Maryland shoreline protection project. This project places sand on the beaches of Ocean City about every 4 years to reduce the risk of coastal storm damage. The most recent replenishment occurred in 2001. Weaver Shoals is located in the federal waters beyond the 3-mile limit. The use of the shoal was previously evaluated in a 2008 EIS and again in a supplemental assessment in 2020. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Baltimore employs a number of BMPs to minimize impact to the shoal, including dredging no more than 5% of its total volume, avoiding the crest of the shoal, dredging evenly and thinly, no more than several feet deep over a wide area. Their maximum dredging depth is 10 feet. And they also dredge no deeper than the ambient depths of the adjacent seafloor. So while the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doesn't undertake physical sampling, doesn't undertake the benthic, biological benthic sampling, they do physical sampling before and after each event. And they have indicated that the BOEM studies that have been provided for other areas demonstrate that the benthic community recovers. Next slide. Okay, this is the Aurora submarine fiber optic cable that was mentioned earlier. So in January, we issued conservation recommendations to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the proposed Alcatel submarine networks cable. The proposed 1.5-inch submarine fiber optic communications cable will extend 3,929 miles between Manasquan, New Jersey, and Lodberg, Denmark. The applicant proposes to bury the cable from the landfall point in New Jersey out to a depth of 3,281 feet, or about 97 nautical miles, after which the cable will be laid on the seafloor surface. The proposed cable crosses the Toms, the Middle Toms, and the Hendrickson Canyons HAPCs. Our primary EFH conservation recommendation was to realign that cable to avoid the HAPCs. Based on our discussions with the Corps, it doesn't appear that that cable or that EFHCR is likely to be accepted. There is a proposed marine sanctuary just to the north, and they aligned their cable to avoid the proposed sanctuary, which pushed it into the HAPCs. But they did use data on existing corals and modeling of the deep sea corals to avoid areas where high densities of corals were either found or expected. So we don't have a formal response from the Corps back yet, but we expect one in the coming weeks. All right, next slide. Okay, Newport mussels. The Newport mussels site is, you can see on the map there, it's about 20 miles southeast of Newport, Rhode Island, and about 9 miles west-southwest of Martha's Vineyard, although that says Arthur's Vineyard. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers issued a public notice for the project. The comment period for that public notice closed on March 12th of this year. In response to the public notice, we provided general feedback on the resources under our jurisdiction, including ESA-listed species, sensitive habitat, and fishing activities. We identified the additional information that was needed to address potential impacts of the project. So at this point, even though the Army Corps has put out a public notice, we do not have sufficient information to initiate the EFH consultation. So we've given the Corps a technical assistance letter, which basically says, here's the information that we're going to need in order to initiate consultation. As always, we've told the Corps and USDPA that we're available to work with them at any time to provide additional data and information to help this project move through the process. Okay, next slide. All right, this is the last one. Potential mineral lease offshore of Virginia. So you may have all seen the press release that BOEM issued back in December. They've received an unsolicited lease sale request from Odyssey Marine Exploration. And we expect that they will publish a request for information in the near future, but the timing is unknown. The RFI will be an opportunity for the public and the council to provide input and comments to BOEM on the project. It appears that it is focused on heavy minerals, sand, and phosphorites offshore Virginia, but we're not exactly sure where because we haven't gotten a map yet. But we will definitely keep the council informed as we know more. And that was all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. I think, my earlier comments about our appreciation as a state agency for our work together is well highlighted, Karen, in your presentations for New Jersey in particular. A lot of projects that we appreciate all the work that is done from your staff to help us out in those situations. I'll look around the table to council members if there's any questions on this update for Karen. Mike, and then I'll go to Joe Grist after Mike Luisi. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, just a comment. Thank you, Karen, for the presentation. This is Mike Luisi from Maryland. I just want to thank you for highlighting some of the I guess communication concerns or coordination concerns on some of these large scale projects. So you mentioned earlier in your presentation the Chesapeake Bay crossing, and then the Fender projects that are being planned. I'm just now getting involved a little bit more with our environmental review program on these projects. And, when I think about the next 10 years and the amount of work the amount of construction that's going to occur right where I live near Annapolis. And I think about the bottleneck so the Chesapeake Bay, there's a 4-mile wide stretch of water that is crossed by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And that 4 miles is a critical entryway for everything that migrates in Maryland and from the ocean to come spawn in our bay. The upper bay is a critical, essential habitat for striped bass spawning. And every project description that I see, every timeline that I read about has these major environmentally impactful either dredging or impact drilling or vibratory drilling, some type of something that is going to create a no bueno, like no good zone about 4 miles wide and probably 4 miles in each direction of this critical area. And I'm afraid that over a 4 or 5 year project to build new bay bridge spans, there's a possibility that we may not have any spawning striped bass during those periods of time. And we've already gone through a 7-year drought for striped bass spawning. And then if these projects pick up and we now have this wall basically stopping anything from going past Annapolis or the middle of the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, we're in real trouble as far as the natural resources that we manage. So, thanks for highlighting the areas of, concern about just the coordination effort. I feel like every time I send a comment in to, provide some fisheries information about these projects, the response is always exactly opposite of what I've suggested. And so if we can find a way even to keep it from being completely opposite of what's suggested, that would be helpful. And I would offer to, maybe you and I, Karen, can connect at some point after the meeting this week and kind of set up something so that I can stay ahead of the drills and the hammers and all the cement and concrete that's coming our way. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. We can do that. I know we have staff in our Annapolis office who are on top of all of these things, and they work very closely with their counterparts in the various state agencies and with the Army Corps of Engineers and Fish and Wildlife Service and EPA. So yeah, we're happy to continue to coordinate and work to minimize the effects of all of this construction on fishery resources.
Great, thanks. Joe Gress?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Karen, thank you for your presentation. Familiar with quite a few of the projects down toward the bay, as my counterpart to North, Mike Louise, just noted. I'm with Virginia. The communication issue is a major concern for us as well on a lot of projects. And of also a growing concern for us that we're starting to hear from the Corps is the use of the word sovereign immunity when it comes to permitting processes. So just want to throw that out there that, I also, like Mike, would like to get a little bit more information from you at some point. The bay projects that are going on are a major concern for us. The offshore project with mineral mining is definitely one that has piqued our interest. The EFH amendment, it looks like its timing is perfect. So it's going to get a test right away. But definitely would like to follow up with you as well, just as Mike had noted. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. We have staff who sit at VIMS who are very active, with our EFH consultations, but also coordinate very closely with VMRC and the researchers at VIMS. So, we're happy to work with all of our state counterparts. When we work together, it kind of amplifies our recommendations because it's coming from both the state and the federal sides of things. So it's generally more effective when we're in line and when we work together.
Agreed, thank you. I'll stay at the table for right now, looking for any other hands on the update, either questions or comments. Sunny, go ahead.
Yeah, and just on my past comment, I was interested in the transatlantic cable they're putting in Ocean City, Maryland, that's going to somewhere in Europe. Have y'all looked at that?
I do not. I will have to check because I don't have anything that's recent on a cable from Ocean City, but it's very possible that we looked at one in early 2005, because I vaguely remember another cable, but I will have to dig into our consultation records and check on that one.
Follow up, Sonny?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
the transatlantic cable, fiber optic cable going into Ocean City, and it goes from there to Europe. That they've just started working on. I've seen some work going on out in the ocean on it. I was just wondering if y'all had anything on it.
We would have, if it was approved, then we've reviewed it. But I will go back and check and make sure, and I will send the information to Jessica.
Okay, thank you. I'll look around the table one more time. Okay, not seeing any hands. I'm going to go to the public, and I see Bonnie Brady. Bonnie, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Bonnie Brady, New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association. Karen, if you're still there, I saw something about New Jersey Windport 2. Could you describe more of that, please?
Sure. The New Jersey Economic Development Authority has a permit to construct phase 1 of the New Jersey Windport. The state was looking to be able to provide jobs and take advantage of all of the offshore wind that had been proposed and was under construction. So they have a permit for phase 1, which is right next to the Salem nuclear power plant. So that's under construction. They are seeking a permit for phase 2, which would expand the facility and include some more space for vessels to come in and more laydown area, because they're looking to be able to store the turbines and put together monopoles and be able to support the industry. So, we were curious as to whether or not this was moving forward because of the situation with offshore wind right now. But the applicant wishes for the permit to continue to be processed. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is doing that. We had asked
Can I interrupt for just a quick second?
Sure,
I thought
absolutely.
that's all in Paulsboro, correct? Though, didn't they break down
No.
that first facility, or is this a different facility?
This one is it's south of that. So it's right next to the nuclear power plant in Salem.
Okay.
So Paulsboro exists. This is the other facility.
Gotcha. All right. So I'm looking at a public notice from July of 25. Artificial Island, Hope Creek, offshore New Jersey
Yep.
Windport. Is that it?
That's the one.
Okay. And has the service made determinations on that? Is there anything we can find anywhere other than the Army Corps document regarding it?
We have issued our conservation recommendations for the project, where we've recommended, I think it's some compensatory mitigation for some fill. We've recommended different options for the dredge material placement rather than placing them offshore of Mad Horse Creek as a beneficial use. We're suggesting that they continue to finish a different beneficial use project that they were working on for phase 1. So that letter should be available on that environmental consultation organizer that I mentioned earlier. We upload our consultation letters to that. So that record will have whatever letter we sent out, as well as when we get a response back from the action agency on any project that's in the system,
And
that
is an
their response
action
letter will be there too.
And this would be New Jersey EDA because it's on land, correct? So that would, or there are parts in the water, I understand, but there's a Robert Reck from AKRF. Is that the company that has the plans or the put the project in?
They would be the consultant to New Jersey EDA.
Gotcha. And I'm sorry, you said that letter would be listed somewhere. Where exactly would that letter be?
If you Google environmental consultation organizer, or if you have access to the presentation that we did or that Jessica had last October, it has a slide that gives you that website.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. I appreciate the question. This state, again, that is a great example of where we we very much appreciate Noah's input and didn't have any differing opinion as a state from the concerns that Noah put forward, particularly with a project that had a lot of, you know, dredge options. So if Bonnie, if you do need anything, you know, reach out to me. Feel free. I can give you the state's comments. I could also help point you in the right direction for what Noah put forward. Very much appreciated there. So, any other questions or comments from the public? Julius, Julie, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Karen, for that presentation. I really enjoyed it. I haven't said that too many times. I have a question about how you follow up on these projects. Do you ever follow up? Or is there any testing done when they're completed? How do we know that these dredge companies put the dredge material in the designated place, like the HARS, for example? Is anybody out there testing? Is there any plan to test? How do we know that the ocean is a big place? How do we know they're doing what they're supposed to be doing is, I guess, really my question. Thank you.
Sure. For the offshore disposal sites, it's usually a combination of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and EPA who are managing those sites, and they're really the ones responsible for tracking to make sure that the dredge material is going where the barge is supposed to be. Like, so they're keeping track of every barge that goes out to those sites, so they know where each barge is going and dropping the material. And then they'll do a post placement survey, a bathymetry survey to see where it's gone. So there's both, the disposal sites in Long Island Sound and the HARS all have their own plans that describe how they're monitored and where the material is going to go. It's not something that we know a monitor. We're not the action agency, but we're part of the ongoing work groups that monitor the sites and look at the future of the sites. So the Corps will be, and the EPA do coordinate with us on these. When we're talking about some of these other beneficial use activities where it's being placed on a wetland or things like that, we request and usually get monitoring reports to show how the placement is progressing, because the idea is to restore habitat. So we want to make sure that that's happening. So they do monitoring over the course of several years to monitor how the wetlands are being restored.
Great, thanks, Karen. And I will say from the state perspective, even though I've worked for 4 of the states on this council, I will only speak for New Jersey in this particular case, and particularly within projects that go beneficial reuse. We have very high standards on how we evaluate the efficacy of what's happening post project, but I think the reviews for the states are absolutely an important part of the process that is happening. So thanks, Julie, for the question. Appreciate that. Yeah. Any other questions on this update? Okay, not seeing any. Yeah, so yeah. Julie, did you have a follow-up? I just want to make sure that.
Yes, I did, if I might. I was wondering, do you know of any instances where there were unauthorized or planned dumps that didn't quite go as well, maybe because of the weather, and so they got maybe like a waiver to dump somewhere else? instead of where they were supposed to dump. Has that ever crossed your desk, Karen?
I have never seen anything like that. I would think it would be something that you would have to reach out to the Corps and EPA to see if they've ever had something like that happen, because they would be the ones who would get notified if there is an issue. I think a lot of times, if the weather is such, they may not be dredging, so there wouldn't be material to be placed. But I couldn't tell you for sure, but we've never seen it.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Julie, and thank you, Karen. Very much appreciate the update. Since I didn't see any other hands, our next agenda item is on the Sturgeon project update. My understanding is that we need some time since that isn't on, it's for later in the day. We want to give the presenter some time. So we are going to take a break. We will reconvene at 3:15. And thank you. And Stephen, if you could put that up for us, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Hey, Steven, this is Jason. Can you hear me?
Yep, sound good.
Okay, Dwayne, I see you're logged into the webinar. You want to check your audio?
Yeah, how's this?
That sounds good. And you want to just do a quick screen share practice here. Just so click the little share button, share. I usually do share the app versus my full window. It seems to work better. Steven, can you make Dwayne a presenter just to test out our, double check our screen sharing here?
How's that?
That's good. I see your slides on the side. Can you try presentation mode, slideshow from beginning? Okay, so now I see a full slide. I'm not sure if this is your starting slide or, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know where my notes went, so I'll have to figure
If
that.
you go to, so, well,
I'm just gonna
if you prefer, we can have Steven.
No, that's fine. I'll do it. I thought I'd set it so that if I went under presenter view, it would automatically do that.
Yeah, just try, just try a couple different slideshows. Usually it will give you an option to bop in and out of presenter view when you start the presentation.
Yeah.
Alternatively, we can just have Steven advance the slides and then you can just kind of like advance. You have two monitors or one right now where you're at?
Yeah, I just got one monitor and I'm working here.
Okay.
Let me
Yeah,
so
just
right,
should be able to just play around with it to see presenter view once you spin it up.
yeah. Let's see what my options are. Gonna do the I'm gonna stop sharing here for a second, Jason, and just try and if I got a couple minutes, I'm just gonna see if I can search in Google to figure out how to do this real quickly with WebEx, okay?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you have presenter view is checked.
Yep.
So when you start your slideshow, you don't see your notes?
No. Yeah.
What's under monitor automatic? What other settings do you have there? Just above use presenter view?
Primary monitor and automatic.
I mean, try primary monitor.
Okay.
And now go to present and see if you get a better, see if your notes come up or not.
Yeah, I'm not, that's okay. I'm not seeing them. Why? It's not the end of the world. Let me,
Here's maybe, no, if you do a screen share and just share what you see, then we'll see your notes as you're going through. So that won't work exactly either. Okay, well, you can try a couple things and see if you can, not quite sure why. Steven, any ideas on why he's not seeing his notes?
Because you only got one screen?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why.
okay. Share file. I'm going to try something here, Jason. So just hold on.
I mean, maybe if you have a printer handy, you could just print off a copy with the notes.
Yeah, what's a printer? No, we're okay if it, worse
Okay,
comes.
I'm just going through my troubleshooting checklist.
Yeah. Let me, hey, Stephen, if I advance on my side, it doesn't change things there? Okay.
Right.
Shoot.
You just have to tell me next slide if I were to share the presentation.
Yeah, no, I shared the file. I saw something on, yeah, that's okay. I'll run it from my side. That's probably easiest. Okay. So I'll just stop sharing and I'll just share the presentation directly and we'll go with it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, I think we have everyone that we need online, so I'll just look around the room to make sure that we get everybody back to the table and consider this 1-minute warning before we get started again here on our last agenda item for the day. Okay, so for those folks online, we do have everyone here around the table and we are ready to roll. I think I've heard both Jason and Dewey checking in, but Dwayne, I believe we're going directly to you on this. If you are ready, we are ready.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. So everything good on your side there?
Good.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just, first of all, I want to apologize for not being there in person. I truly despise lecturing virtually, and but I could not make it. And secondly, I want to start off by noting that I'm here presenting this work today, but it's sort of the culmination of well over a decade of efforts, both myself and others that have come before me and after me, that I've been working with, including Daniel Millay, who is a graduate student at the University of Delaware, Henry Milliken, who's at the Northeast Fishery Science Center, Lynn Lankshire, who's at the Office of Protected Resources up in Garfo. Of course, Jason Ditton, everybody knows Jason. One of my dearest and friends and closest colleagues, Kevin Wark, who I talk to on a very regular basis, and Edward Hale at the University of Delaware. So my charge today, what Chris has asked me to do, is to give you an update on our very recently completed work that we did in the dogfish fishery, but I'm also going to give you a little bit of a snapshot on some recent work that we've done, as well as a little bit of historical work to sort of get caught up in hopes of kind of providing some insights in terms of where we're going. So with that, I'll get started. So again, my goal here is to sort of give you an overview on Atlantic sturgeon management. Hopefully you'll walk away with learning one or two new things, give you a little bit of insights on our pre-listing bycatch reduction efforts, talk about a recently completed NOAA NIMS bycatch reduction engineering project. Then I'm going to dig into the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council project that we just finished and talk a little bit about future directions. So a primer on Atlantic sturgeon. Atlantic sturgeon are your classic K-selected species. It's slow maturing, very long lived, estimates upwards of 75 to 100 years in adults historically. And females spawn infrequently, probably anywhere between 2 to 5 years. In terms of management issues, it's truly a difficult one in the sense that these animals are very highly migratory along the coastline. It includes 14 state jurisdictions and 4 provincial jurisdictions in Canada. Animals that my group and others have tagged here in the Mid-Atlantic have moved all the way from the state of Florida. We've had tagged animals that have been recorded down there into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the St. Lawrence River. So truly a coastal species. And one important point that I want to note is that as an adult, these animals spend over 95% of their lifespan in marine waters. And yet when we look at critical habitat and other protection measures, there are no critical habitats in marine waters. So that sort of, that takes away one of the tools in our toolbox to recover this species. So what's going on with Atlantic sturgeon? The history of Atlantic sturgeon management in the Mid-Atlantic goes back to the 1890s. And New Jersey actually had one of the first regulations where they actually prohibited the catch of what were known as mammoth sturgeon. And that was a native word for small sturgeon. And that was a result of the fishery crash that took place in the Delaware River. In the 1990s, the fishery management plan for Atlantic sturgeon was produced by the ASMFC. Ultimately, that resulted in a coastwide moratorium in 1998. In 2007, NOAA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service convened a status review team that recommended listing. In October 2011, that ruling was published. And then in April of 2012, that ruling was implemented. And so what we are living in today is this post-ESA world, by which there are 5 distinct population segments, or DPSs, along the Atlantic coast, and everything south of the Gulf of Maine is listed as an endangered DPS. And I'm happy to talk about that if folks want to later. So during the listing decision, one of the listing factors that was noted was actually, and this is pulled from the ESA, the Endangered Species Act petition, was bycatching commercial and recreational fisheries utilizing sink gill nets. Specifically, the monkfish and dogfish were considered significant sources of mortality. And I do just want to point out one other thing which is factor E, which is this question of vessel strikes. At the time that there were listings, at the time that the listing was done, we were just starting to get a sense of this, and now we know it's probably a much bigger factor. But again, I hope to come back and talk to that again. So again, this bycatch in commercial and recreational fisheries, specifically sink gill nets, was noted in the original ruling determination. So prior to the listing, we started working with Kevin Wark and other commercial harvesters in New Jersey to evaluate the effects of tie downs, tie down height, and mesh numbers on catches. What I'm going to do here is just provide a real quick snapshot of the work that we did. And so we worked with 2 commercial fishing vessels out of Barnegat Light. The gill nets were randomly assigned in paired replicates. We had experimental gear and treatment gear fished out alongside each other, and we had at-sea observers. And otherwise, these were normal operational monkfish trips. And the net configurations, as you will see in the first year, this was the experimental net that we used in the first year. We had our industry standard net, which is at the top. And this was used over the course of these 3 years from 2010 to 2012. And the industry standard net was 12. So all of these nets were, I should note that all these nets were 12 inches, 0.9 millimeter twine. The industry standard net was 12 meshes tied down to 8 meshes, and a tie down every other port. And so in the first year of the study, there were some questions about the impact of tie downs on marine mammal landings. So we took the tie downs out of the net to see what the effect was on monkfish and what the effect was on sturgeon. I need to stress again that this wasn't something that we intended to do, but we were directed to do this at the start. In 2011, the net, what we did was we modified, Kevin modified the net to tie it down to 6 meshes, or take it from 6 meshes and tie that down to 2 meshes. So a much lower net. And then in 2012, we took the same net, he expanded it, just raised it from 8 meshes tied down to 2. And I don't want to go into the results, these individual results, but I want to hopefully point out a couple of the findings of this study. And the first one shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, but in the first year when we took the tie downs out of the nets, unfortunately we killed 9 common dolphins as a result of that in the stand-up gear. And we had 0 common dolphins in the tie down net. So we knew that this was a problem for marine mammals, but this is what we were directed to do in the first year of the study. So tie down's good for marine mammals. That was the take-home message there. And if we summarize this, what we found was that over the 3 years that we did this work, 2010 to 2012, again, pre-listing, what we found was that the overall encountered rates, we found when we looked at Atlantic sturgeon encounters, we encountered 23 in 2010, 37 in 2011, and 35 in 2012. And what we did is we combined these across all these years to look at survival over soak time. And what you can see is this pooled analysis over here. We deduced that Atlantic sturgeon mortality rate increases significantly with soak time. So that blue line there is that probability of an animal. Above that blue line is an animal. it's more likely to be dead. That animal below that line is more likely to be alive. And so what you see is that at about 24, or I'm sorry, in 24 hours soak time, it's about 45% survival rate, 55% mortality rate. And as you increase soak times, that proportion of mortality increases over time. So soak time is important for Atlantic sturgeon survival. And I should note that this is, when we're talking about soak time here in Atlantic sturgeon, all we know is when the animal is coming on the boat and when the net was set. We don't have any real good sense of how long the animal has been in the net. So in terms of the pre-listing conclusions, again, from a marine mammal perspective, tie downs lower the profiles of the nets and reduce marine mammal encounter rates. We predicted that going into it, but again, we were directed to do that. In terms of Atlantic sturgeon, the pooled data showed an increase in mortality with increased soak time. So we knew that soak times were important. And within the limits of this work, tie downs did not appear to increase sturgeon capture. I should note here that in our directed sampling that we have done with Kevin and others, where we actually target Atlantic sturgeon for transmitter implantation and other sampling efforts, we don't use tie downs. The animals are up off the bottom, as we'll talk about in a little bit. And so having a higher net profile helps us catch those animals. And with regard to the target species, in this case was monkfish and winter skates, tie downs did appear to increase capture, thus are favorable from a fishery probability standpoint. And the kind of the takeaway message here, and again, this was back in 2012, was that 8 mesh low profile net reduced the overall landings by about 10%. And although lower, we thought that that might be a reasonable compromise compared to closures due to sturgeon bycatch. Excuse me for a moment. And so with that, again, in 2012, we continued to move forward. And that led to a project that we kicked off in 2021, a project that I co-authored with Ed Hale at the University of Delaware, Kevin Wark, Henry, and Len. And so we actually got some funding through the Bycatch Reduction Engineering Program. And what we did here was we essentially carried out a more broad scale test of the net design that we ultimately landed on with Kevin. And in terms of the control net was 12-inch stretch, as I previously mentioned. In the experimental net, that was expanded out to 13 inches. Twine diameter, we reduced it from 0.9 to 0.81. The webbing height, the net was tied down from 12 meshes. We took it down to 8 meshes. And the tie down height was significantly lower too. So there was a 30-inch tie down height. And the tie down spacings, we had a tie down every quart. And what was important here is that we took the results of the work, the initial work that we did with Kevin, and we tried to expand that out into a broader area. So we had 7 vessels that participated between Rhode Island and New Jersey. We targeted for 80 net sets, paired net sets, and we ended up with 67 net sets for some reasons that I can go into later if we want to talk about it. And in this instance, we allowed the fishers to self-report data on Atlantic sturgeon bycatch and target landings. This limits what we could do with Atlantic sturgeon because they are now listed, but we felt it was a nice compromise to get a broader number of individuals included in the project. And the nets were fished in replicate pairs, same location, deployment time, soak time, string length. And the project actually started in November 2023 and ended in February of last year. And I want to note the gap between the funding. If you note there, it's in the grant agreement is 2021. We didn't start the project until 2023, and that was due to we ran into issues with COVID in terms of getting our gear built. I think it took somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 16 months just to get the webbing delivered. And then unfortunately, by the time we got the webbing delivered and everything else, prices had increased about 40% for our raw materials. So this project was a real bear to get going. But once we did, I think we have some pretty interesting results, which I want to share with you today. So, and the results, or I'm sorry, the objectives of this project were to compare Atlantic sturgeon bycatch between the standard control net and again, our industry and our experimental gill net. And that, again, the experimental gill net, 13-inch mesh stretch, 0.81, and then tied down lower. And we wanted to compare target species landing, primarily monkfish, spiny dogfish, and winter skate. I wanted to assess the effects of soak time on net performance between those configurations, and then ultimately predict estimated Atlantic sturgeon landings as soak time increases. So the way that this was done, and if folks have questions on this, the statistics, Daniel and Ed were really the ones who handled the analytical side of things. So we looked at catch per unit effort, which was catch per net length, so the number of fish per meter of net. All nets were 300 feet long or 91.4 meters, and they were tied in strings, but the string length varied, but it was equal for each boat. Univariate statistical analysis, we used a Wilcox and signed rank test of CPUE, and then we used a Fisher's exact test to test for presence or absence between those nets. And then what we did was applied delta generalized additive models with a two-step approach with a zero to deal with the zero inflated data. The binomial data, that was a logit, was for sturgeon presence, zeros and ones, and then a gamma log of catch per unit effort. And what we then did was predict catch per unit effort for each species by net type and assess soak time effects. And all this was done in R using a specific model package that Daniel was employed. And so what we found was, and this is a plot of retention rates, or you can consider this encounter rates for Atlantic sturgeon as the Atlantic sturgeon are coming on the vessels. Again, this is recorded. The individual harvesters are recording encounter rates of Atlantic sturgeon, so they're telling us yes or no on the boat. And then what we're getting is trip landings and weights, and then we're going back in and estimating catch per unit effort based on the recorded weights that at time of sale. So what we found is that Atlantic sturgeon, and on the bottom here are the control nets, or on the left of these panels, we have Atlantic sturgeon in the first group, monkfish, spiny dogfish, and winter skate. So what we found was that the encounter rates in the control gear was about 1.44 times that we saw in the experimental gear for Atlantic sturgeon. Monkfish were more commonly found, again, a 1.41 times in the control gear versus experimental. We look at spiny dogfish. Spiny dogfish were more commonly found in the control gear versus the experimental gear. And for winter skate, they were everywhere. So equally likelihood that we would find winter skate in both sets of gear. So what we ultimately came to was there was no significant differences in the likelihood of gear encounters for all four species. That one of the issues that we have is statistical significance and power, and we can talk about that later. I can provide those estimates at a later time. When we look at the catch per unit effort, again, Atlantic sturgeon in the first group over here, monkfish, spiny dogfish, and winter skate. And this is catch per unit effort with these box whisker plots for the median and 25th and 50th quartiles. And landings percent differences, we saw a 43% decrease in landings of Atlantic sturgeon in the experimental nets. And I should note that this is only for the positive catch per unit effort. So one of the things that we found was that Atlantic sturgeon were really rare in our landings. And so to deal with that, to deal with the rarity of this, we only compared those treatment or those hulls where we had a positive Atlantic sturgeon landing. For monkfish, we saw a 27.5% decrease in monkfish landings between the experimental and control. We saw a 7.4% increase in spiny dogfish and a 35.1% decrease in winter skate for this gear in our Brett project. And when we look at the likelihood of capture in these control nets, so the likelihood of capture in the control nets and and on top here, so a 1-to-1 ratio. So this is control versus experimental. That 1-to-1 line is here. So that would be there's equivalence between, there's no difference between the control and the experimental gear, right? And so what you see here is that as this line is shifted to the right, it's more likely to be found in the control gear than the experimental gear. So for Atlantic sturgeon, we saw a 1.62% increase in the likelihood of capture in the control nets, whereas the overall magnitude of that in terms of catch per unit effort was about a 1.27% or 1.27% magnitude of the odds ratio. For monkfish, it was quite a bit larger. We saw monkfish was about 2.41 for the odds ratio, and about a 1.29 when we look at the catch per unit effort. Spiny dogfish, we saw an almost twofold odds ratio for spiny dogfish in the control gear, whereas when we actually look at the catch per unit effort of spiny dogfish, the spiny dogfish did a little bit better in the experimental gear actually. And finally, when we look at winter skate, there was equal likelihood. Again, we saw a winter skate in both types of gears. But when we look at the catch per unit effort, the CPUE, the difference, it was much greater in the control gear than the experimental gear. So when we look at, and these are plots of our predicted delta GAM for the total catch per unit effort versus soak time. So looking at how the gears do over time. And the control gear here, and so we have sturgeon in the upper panel, upper left panel, monkfish in the upper right, spiny dogfish in the lower left, and winter skate in the bottom right. And so this is predicted total catch per unit effort over soak time in hours. And the control gear, as you'll see here for this model, is in black, and the experimental gear is in the blue. And you see the confidence intervals of those as it goes out. And what we see in terms of mean predicted catch per unit effort, there's an overall 44.6% decrease in the predicted catch per unit effort in Atlantic sturgeon with the experimental gear. When we look at monkfish, there's about a 24% decrease in monkfish landings with the experimental gear. So we decrease Atlantic sturgeon, we also decrease monkfish. We see spiny dogfish are pretty similar, about a 15% reduction in spiny dogfish landings. And when we get to winter skate, with winter skate, there's about a 40% decrease in catch per unit effort over time with winter skate. So the gear, again, it looks like we're catching fewer sturgeon, but there's also decreases in targeted species landings as well. So in terms of our overall conclusions for the NOAA project, the experimental nets significantly reduced Atlantic sturgeon bycatch and target catch landings, but yet for monkfish and winter skate. Dogfish, it didn't appear to do much for dogfish. Species encounter rates did not significantly differ between net configurations, though. So we see a lot of those animals in both net. And increased catch per unit effort for all 4 species with increased soak time. So across, what that shows is that across our soak times, our nets are not becoming saturated. And again, you wouldn't expect that because the harvesters should be going out and getting the gear before we start seeing diminished landings. And there were catch per unit differences were a result of the net construction. And ultimately, the delta GAM predicted consistently higher catch per unit effort in control nets compared to experimental nets for Atlantic sturgeon, monkfish, and winter skate. And I just want to, that's our Brett project really quickly. And again, I apologize for not being there. I wish I could be. And to kind of pivot to our Mid-Atlantic dogfish project, and this is the one that we just completed at the end of last year. And the effect or the objective here was to test the efficacy of modified gill nets in the smooth dogfish and spiny dogfish fisheries for reducing Atlantic sturgeon bycatch. I know that this topic has recently got a lot of attention, and it's great. I think there's some real promising results. And the approach that was done here was to conduct gillnet trials in the spring smooth dogfish fishery in New Jersey as well as the fall spiny dogfish fishery in Maryland. And hopefully I'll keep the two fisheries separated. So the methods that we employed, the statistical areas, it was 614 in the spring fishery, and that's for the smooth dogfish, and that was up at Barnegat Light. It was statistical area 621 down in Ocean City for the spiny dogfish fishery. We worked with 2 vessels in each port in Barnegat Light, New Jersey, and that fishery took place between June 10th and the 26th of 2025. And then in Ocean City, Maryland, between November 10th and December 9th of last year. We tried to get 12 trips per vessel with replicated hulls. And here we were able to put a NOAA NIMS observed observer on the vessel to measure catch, and importantly, sturgeon encounters to estimate where the sturgeon were in the nets. So in terms of our Mid-Atlantic project, again, this is the one we just completed. There are 2 different fisheries and 2 different net configurations. And I want to just spend a little bit of time to walk you through that. So in the smooth dogfish fishery, which took place up in New Jersey, in the first column here, we have height, and the height of the control nets in the smooth dogfish fishery, as well as the spiny dogfish fishery, both of those were 25 meshes. In the experimental net, we lowered the experimental net down to 12 meshes. Mesh size was the same in both, 6-inch diameter stretch, and the twine diameter was held constant in all of these too. So 0.9 for the smooth dogfish, and there was no raised foot rope, and I'll get to this in a moment. So what we have here in the smooth dogfish fishery in New Jersey, it's effectively a reduction in net height, right? So that's the variable. When we look at the spiny dogfish fishery that took place down in Ocean City, Maryland, we have a reduction in mesh height from 25 meshes to 12 meshes. The mesh size here is the industry standard, which is 5 3/16. The twine diameter for both the control and experimental was 0.81 millimeters. But importantly, in the experimental nets that we employed down in Ocean City, Maryland, there was a raised foot rope. So there was the net was raised off the bottom by 12 inches with the goal here of allowing sturgeon to swim under the net. In the smooth dogfish fishery, the thought was we can allow sturgeon to swim over the net. And so the results of these fisheries, in terms of the New Jersey smooth dogfish fishery, we had 128 paired hulls. The New Jersey fishery is a set and haul fishery. The mean soak time is just a little bit under an hour with the standard deviation of 0.15 hours. And the range of soak times anywhere from 0.25 hours to 1.17 hours. So it's a set and haul. And I think that's a result of the catch levels. In the Maryland spiny dogfish fishery, we had 25 hulls for both of the vessels. The mean soak time was 12.6 hours for the standard gear and 13 hours for the experimental gear. It seemed that the vessels consistently hauled the standard gear first. It was just a little bit shorter soak times. and you see the range there. And I want to note that we censored a few of the hulls in the Maryland fishery for the last day. There was an issue with weather, and the soak times were really, really low on the last day, and we just felt it was best to remove those from from our data. So in terms of the results, when we look at the encounter rates for Atlantic sturgeon, similar to what we found in other fisheries, there are really low Atlantic sturgeon encounter rates. So the zero inflation rates in the control net were 89.1% and 93% in the experimental rates. And when we look at the mean catch per unit effort of those, when we censor those zero hulls and we look at the catch per unit effort between gear types, it was lower. So what we have here on the bottom, this plot over here on the right, I'm sorry, is we have the standard nets or the control nets, and then the experimental nets for the smooth dogfish fishery on the left-hand side and the spiny dogfish fishery on the right. And these lines are the joint pairs, so individual hulls. And you can see that the general trend is that when the standard gear was hauled, the experimental gear was hauled, and we'd see a little bit more or higher probability of Atlantic sturgeon in the experimental gear. I want to note that it was not significantly different, or there was no significant difference here. And we have a pretty low statistical power, which I'm happy to talk about at a later point. When we look at the spiny dogfish fishery, zero inflation percentages there were much lower. So we saw 48% of the gear were zero inflated in the standard gear, whereas 88% in the experimental gear. So Atlantic sturgeon had a much lower encounter probability in the experimental gear in the spiny dogfish fishery. And that's reflected also in the landing. So again, here we saw a decrease in overall Atlantic sturgeon catch per unit effort in the experimental gear. But I would again caution you that our statistical power is pretty low. When we look at target species for both of these fisheries, smooth dogfish, really low zero inflated values in the New Jersey fishery, ranging between 1.5 and 4%. As you would expect, there's short soak times, really targeted. And what we found was that there was actually an increase in the abundance for some reason in the experimental gear. And that was a significant difference between the experimental gear. So the experimental gear appeared to be working better for catching smooth dogfish in New Jersey. The spiny dogfish fishery in Maryland, there were a lot of spiny dogfish, and the probability of seeing of a zero haul in spiny dogfish was really, really low. Those zero inflation values range from 0 in the standard gear to 0.4 in the experimental gear. And mean spiny dogfish in the standard gear was 0.142 kilograms per hour per meter net. And this was greater than in the experimental gear, but it wasn't statistically significant. So there are some interesting trends here. But again, I think the question of statistical significance and statistical power is something that we need to dig into. When we look at the gears and we look at the target species, the length of the individuals in the smooth dogfish fishery, there is no significant difference between standard and experimental. The smooth dogfish that were landed in the standard or experimental nets, and we saw a significant difference in experimental nets in the spiny dogfish fishery, whereas the experimental gear caught significantly larger individuals. We think that's being driven by a few outliers, but it's something that, again, that we want to go into. And when we look at the total length of Atlantic sturgeon in both these fisheries, again, in the springtime on the left-hand side here in the smooth dogfish fishery and the spiny dogfish fishery on the right, with the control gear as the left-hand side of these panels and the experimental gear on the right, there's no significant difference within year. But what we note is that in the springtime off the coast of New Jersey, those are larger animals that are being intercepted in that fishery or bycaught in that fishery than we see in the fall down in Ocean City, Maryland. And based on what we know about Atlantic sturgeon life history, this makes sense. Those are, larger subadults and adults that are pushing up the coast in the springtime, and smaller juveniles and subadults that are coming out of the rivers in the fall of the year. And one of the I think, a finding which I think is really super great, and this was something that Daniel Millay dug into, was when we look at the placement of Atlantic sturgeon. Again, that was one of the nice things about having the observers on the boats, is we were able to look at the vertical placement and the horizontal placement of Atlantic sturgeon. On the left-hand side of this panel, you have the standard industry standard net. On the right-hand side, you have the experimental net. And what we see and again, you have to remember that the experimental net is lower than on a proportional basis, the experimental net is lower than the standard net. But what we see in both cases is that Atlantic sturgeon were caught in that second quartile of the net. So the Atlantic sturgeon are up off the bottom in the springtime, moving along the beach. And we hypothesize this based on movement rates. The animals are moving much quicker as they move based on telemetry in the springtime. And they're pushing up the coast. And we see that here, in that the animals are higher in the water column. And the density of these is reflective of the proportion of individuals that were caught in that area. And when we look at and so again, this is for the smooth dogfish fishery in New Jersey in the springtime. And we compare that to the spiny dogfish fishery that's taking place down in Ocean City, Maryland. What we find there is when we look at the industry standard net, and again, this is the one top to bottom, 25 meshes, no tie downs. And what we find there is that there's a significant difference with landings or encounters of Atlantic sturgeon along the foot rope of the net, the lowest quartile of the net. When we look at the experimental net, there's sturgeon throughout the net, and sort of a mixed proportion. So they're homogeneous throughout the net in the experimental net. But when you look at the control net, the industry standard net, those animals are tight to the bottom. And I think this provides a really interesting behavioral mechanism that we may be able to explore for future work in terms of net modifications. If we can get those nets up off the bottom a little bit while keeping targeted catches, that might provide a benefit for sturgeon as well as the fishery. So in terms of future directions, where we're going with this work, we have a working draft of our BREP project we're going to be targeting the fisheries bulletin. Daniel gave that to me. I'm planning to look at that. And we have a working draft of most of the mid-Atlantic work. We're also probably going to target fisheries bulletin here so that we can hopefully get them out quickly. I want to note that even though Atlantic sturgeon encounters are relatively rare, when you multiply the amount of gear that's out there, they can be significant, especially when you look at the impact that they can have on natal populations. So just as an example, our estimates, we published a couple of estimates for the number of spawning adult Atlantic sturgeon in the Delaware River, and those are 150 to 200 animals a year, adults in the Delaware River. So it doesn't take much to significantly impact recovery in that population. And I also just want to point out, and I really want to thank Chris and Jason for their support, and everybody else in the industry. It's important to understand that while bycatch isn't the only issue, it's one of the only levers that can be employed to reduce mortality in many systems. And I'm thinking specifically here about the Delaware River, where we know that vessel strikes, which is when commercial ships are killing sturgeon in the navigation channel and other areas around spawning sites, that's a significant problem. But the issue is I don't know how NOAA is going to address that. So, Kevin and I have talked about this a lot over the years, and one of the levers that they can use is to try and reduce bycatch in marine waters. And finally, I just want to give an acknowledgement. The work that I presented here was a result of a large effort, a number of fishing boats, the Dana Christine with Kevin and his crew, the Ambition, the Woolly Bully, I see that Lisa's on here, the Natalie, the TNT, the More Misery, the Compromise, Traveler with Ricky, the Riddler, the Independence. And I also just want to thank the NOAA Bycatch Engineering Project for this award. And again, I want to thank Chris for all of his support and the council support over the last couple of years. So thank you very much. If there's questions, Stephen?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And thanks to everyone that has worked on this. I know I'm biased, but I don't feel I'm overinflating when I say Kevin Work is a bit of a national treasure, and we're very lucky to have him. I don't see Dr. Hale on here, so I can say mean things about him. As a New Jersey rep, we're sad that we do not have Ed working for us anymore, is the only reason why I mentioned that. But I really appreciate all this work, Dewey, and thank you to you and Daniel and Ed. And so any questions for Dr. Fox? I see Bobby, go ahead. And then I'll go to Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. The one question I do have was between the controls and the experiment. Did you notice that there was any difference in the capture condition of the sturgeons? I mean, were they more viable as far as to have less presumed release mortality in the control gear? I mean, control gear versus the experimental or vice versa?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So that was in the, I don't think we noted any I'd have to go back and look and I can get an answer to Chris and the council, but we do have release condition and that was recorded by the observers. I should note, we did, there were more, we had more we encountered more mortality, and I'm speaking specifically about the Mid-Atlantic project, the last one, the Dogfish project, and we encountered significant, or not significantly, but we encountered more mortalities in the experimental gear, but it was a really low number of mortalities. And ultimately what I need to do to get you an answer is to dig into the observer records, because I'm almost positive we have condition at the time of release. And that's a score, a metric that I can provide you, but I don't have that information in front of me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Other questions from Council, Todd? Oh, sorry, and I'll go to Todd first and then Rich. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks. Todd Janeski, State of Virginia. So Dwayne, thanks for the research and the work on that. Could you go back to the beginning of the slides? I didn't see in your report. The New Jersey fishery, if I'm not mistaken, is a day drift. The Virginia fishery is an overnight anchored soak. Did you look at the differences between those types of fisheries specifically, or just compare the one net type cut down as the experiment? Sorry, it's pretty, has a pretty robust, still spiny dog industry, and I'm definitely very interested.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the question, I apologize. I'm not sure what the question is.
The question is the difference between the two types of net cut down methods you use, the day drift versus, did you look at Virginia's anchored gill net fishery?
We have not, the results that the results that I'm presenting here is just the results that we had working with the two fishing vessels, the Woolly Bully and the Ambition out of Ocean City, Maryland. That's the only results that I presented here. We have not looked at any of the Virginia data.
So, and I guess it's more of the fishing type, and maybe I'm not just familiar with Maryland's approach. If anyone can answer, is Maryland using an anchored gill net, or are they using a day drift? Is it overnight or day drift? Sonny, looking at you, buddy.
It's an overnight soak.
It is an overnight soak. Is it bottom anchored as well?
Bottom anchored. Yes.
Okay, all right. I appreciate that. Thanks for the clarification on that. That's all.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Fox. Could you give us an idea of the scale in mortality between the vessel strikes and the net and the bycatch in our net fisheries? Thanks.
Is that Rich Wong? Is that who that was?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't, sorry, Rich, I don't know. Your name didn't come up, so I apologize. I don't think we have estimates on bycatch, Rich, as you know. And I haven't dug into those too recently. The issue with vessel strikes is one that is, I don't think we have any idea. I mean, we have no, I don't think there are any solid estimates on the number of vessel strikes or the magnitude of vessel strikes. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of desire from the Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to do much about that. Does that answer your question?
No, thanks.
I don't know. The short answer is, Rich, I don't.
It is an answer, yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Fox. You're not on the hook for that question. I'll just say that. But looking around the table again to council and including hands. I do see Jason has his hand up. So Jason, did you have something to add?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess just also harkening back to the motivation for this study, the council put in a number of requirements for monkfish and spiny dogfish fishing. The hope was to find potentially find some other gear solutions that may be kind of less less onerous to the industry, but in terms of the overnight soak prohibitions further south. And so, I'm not sure that there seemed like there may be some promising results with the spiny dogfish results out of Maryland. I'm not quite sure that we've yet identified, okay, go with this particular, and Dwayne, correct me if I'm wrong here, this particular gear type you can move to and get rid of some of these other restrictions, kind of have to wade through some of the statistics a bit more, really get a handle on, the significance of the reductions, the maybe impact on mortality or not, before we kind of really can kind of decide whether or not, we have viable kind of replacements for some of the other measures that were put in place. Is that a fair summary, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would echo that, Jason. And I think, again, in the briefing document that we provided, there are estimates on what, in terms of our power analyses, what we would need to do to come up to say with some degree of certainty what, how robust are our results. And because Atlantic sturgeon are relatively, it's not something that happens all the time, it's difficult to get those sample sizes. And yeah, kudos to you guys for starting this work. I think, I've been talking to Kevin about it, is, it's the industry has perfected their gear over, decades of tweaking it and everything. And to come in, it's like we jump in, we do something, and then we go away, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But I agree. I think there's some interesting signs there. And I know that Kevin and Roger and Ricky and the other guys, they've been talking about what are the next steps in the gear. So I think there's some promising stuff there.
Very good. Thank you. Chris Batsavage, and then I'm going to go to Greg Hewitt after that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the presentation, Dwayne. For the spiny dogfish results, the mean size of dogfish in both the experimental and control nets were pretty similar, and it seemed kind of small, like low 70s, and at least historically, I thought the fishery landed fish that were kind of more in the 80, upper 70s to low 80s centimeter range. I guess the question is, the range and mean size of dogfish caught in this study, is that reflective of what the fishery is currently catching today? And I'm asking to kind of think about the future, how applicable this is in the future. If it's catching marketable sized dogfish while avoiding sturgeon. Thanks.
Yeah, Chris, and I apologize. I maybe Jason can answer that question, but I think it's a reflection on the mesh size that was mandated, right? So it's 5 3/16, and that was what we were, that's what we had to use. So, and Jason may have a comment on that, maybe that that's resulted in a change in what is being landed in the fishery. Jason, do you want to take that?
I think we'd have to, maybe look at some other data sources, either Observer or from GillNet, or maybe some trawl to try to figure out, even on the control gears, were these dogfish unusually small for some reason? But so that's a good question, and I think maybe we could look to some other data sources to try to figure out, were these representative of the fish that were there, or was there something else going on here that was influencing that?
Yeah, and just, and again, that's a real great question, Chris. And frankly, I wasn't aware of that, but it's a snapshot, right? So it's two vessels, fishing over a month between, early to mid-November and early to, mid-December of last year. So there, could have just been small fish pushing through.
Great, thank you both. I appreciate that. I got a couple hands. I see, Greg, I have you next, and then I'm going to go to Ted.
Yeah, just real quick. When there are the vessel strikes, does that occur during the migration, or is that this type of year? I mean, time of year. I see a lot of this time of year right now. The fish jumping and everything. And is there certain times of year where there's more of vessel strikes than other times of the year?
Short answer is yes, and I think it's a combination. So vessel traffic is pretty consistent throughout the year, but when you start to look at when those the animals are and so these animals are only in the rivers. The adults are in the rivers, depending on the individual system, from the mid-spring till the early part of the summer, and then they're out of there. And so you do see a peak in carcass reporting rates and the number of carcasses that have been reported in the springtime, and down in Virginia and some of the other areas. So that springtime that we see here in Delaware, in the Delaware and the Hudson, down further south in the Chesapeake, they see a bimodal distribution with animals in the spring. And then again in the fall, the primary spawning season down there in a lot of those southern rivers is in the fall. So there is definitely a seasonal component to vessel strikes.
Thanks, Suey. Ted Platt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dwayne, for that presentation and your work on sturgeon. I was just following through slides 15 through 18, and I think this is an easy question, but it seemed like at the end of it, the CPUE, you were looking at a 38% reduction in winter skate landings on between the control and the experimental. Did I get that right?
Yes. Yeah, and that's overall. Yes. Yeah. So that's our predicted reduction in winter skate catch per unit effort.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I did some work with Dr. Milliken, and that's pretty consistent with what we saw. So,
yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any other hands around the table, but I do want to take it out to the public. If there are any questions from the public, we'll put those to Dewey or Jason. Not seeing any. Okay. So Dr. Fox, I think you are good. Very much appreciate the work that's being done and this update to the council. I'm sure that New Jersey's appreciation for this work is huge, and we will be reaching out to continue discussions on this. And for those that don't know, Kevin Wark is also one of our Marine Fishery Council within the state's council representatives, and so appreciate all the work that's being done so far. So thank you. And with that, we are actually at our last agenda item for today. So we can wrap up, I believe, Jason, unless you had anything else on this. Not hearing anything. All right. So, Chris, any other updates for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. We do have hospitality this evening. It's almost at the top of the building. It's 4012. So 4012. So you do need a key pass to get up to 4012. If you don't have one, find someone that does. Everyone's invited and hospitality is open now. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. We will be adjourned and we will be starting again tomorrow at 9 a.m.